I'm a licensed professional counselor, and this is my mental health analysis of the Chris and Raquelle Judge case. These are my speculations. What kind of psychological forces could drive a married couple to charm dozens of families into trusting them with their life savings and their most personal dream, the family home, only to walk away and leave those homes half finished and those families financially devastated? That level of sustained deception usually points toward a powerful need for control, where the immediate rewards of manipulation and financial gain consistently outweigh any sense of long-term responsibility or genuine connection to the people being harmed. In cases involving large-scale fraud like this one, we frequently observe patterns that suggest underlying personality traits focus far more on personal benefit than on the well-being of others. Stay with me as I walk through the documented behaviors in this case and explore what those behaviors might reveal about possible mental health patterns, all grounded in the verified facts of how the scheme unfolded and ultimately collapsed. The most current development occurred on December 30th, 2025, when Christopher Judge, a 40-year-old resident of Fort Worth, Texas, entered a guilty plea to the federal charge of conspiracy to commit wire fraud in the United States District Court for the Northern District of Texas. His wife entered her own guilty plea to the same charge just days earlier. Both of them now face sentencing hearings scheduled for April 2026. Christopher could receive a sentence of up to 20 years in federal prison, while his wife faces a maximum of 5 years. Their guilty pleas officially closed a chapter on a fraud scheme that operated through their company, Judge DFW LLC, from August 2020 until January 2023. The couple presented themselves as trusted experts in custom home building and major renovations throughout North Texas. They specifically targeted families who were searching for affordable ways to achieve their dream homes or to significantly upgrade existing properties. From a psychological perspective, this consistent strength they showed in those initial client interactions stand out as a form of calculated charisma. People who engage in long-term cons often demonstrate exceptional social skills at the beginning, and those skills can effectively mask deeper difficulties with forming authentic emotional bonds. How is it possible for someone to keep up with the warm, trustworthy appearance while fully aware of severe harm their actions will eventually cause? One explanation lies in an extraordinary capacity to compartmentalize, allowing the person to separate the pleasant surface-level interactions from the destructive consequence that followed later. Christopher allegedly repeatedly claimed to hold a license as an architect, even though he did not possess any such credential. He and his wife leveraged that false professional status to offer bids far below what legitimate competitors could provide. Families would sign contracts, hand over substantial initial deposits, and watch as some preliminary construction actually began. But it didn't last. Additional payments arrived in scheduled installments, yet meaningful progress soon slowed to a halt. Money collected from one project was routinely redirected to cover the cost of other projects or withdrawn for personal expenses. This repeating cycle prompts an important question about mental health. What internal mechanism enables a person to keep taking such serious risk in fraud, even after client complaints began to accumulate and warning signs became impossible to ignore? The behavior frequently aligns with heightened impulsivity connected to an intense reward-seeking tendencies, in which the short-term rush of receiving large sum of money completely overshadows any realistic consideration of future consequences. Federal investigators discovered that the judges deposited client funds into a single commingled account rather than maintaining separate escrow or project-specific accounts as required by law and basic standards. From that account, more than $82,000 went toward Amazon purchases. Approximately $27,000 covered mortgage payments on their own property, and roughly $10,000 was spent on plastic surgery procedures. All of this occurred while numerous homes remained unfinished, featuring serious problems such as missing windows, multiple building code violations, and structurally inadequate framing work. The experience of Kristen, who paid around $200,000 for what was supposed to be a comprehensive home renovation. The early stages appeared satisfactory, but the project quickly shifted into a pattern of overcharges for materials that never arrived and work that was never completed. When she pressed Christopher for answers and accountability, all communications abruptly ended. She ultimately spent another $200,000 of her own money to make the house more livable, then sold the property at a loss and moved in with her parents to recover financially and emotionally. The decision to cut off contact so completely offers a clear window into avoidance as a primary coping strategy. Individuals involved in prolonged scams often rely on this tactic to shield themselves from direct confrontation with the human suffering that they have caused. By removing themselves from the equation, they reduce the immediate emotional pressure that might otherwise force acknowledgement of guilt or empathy. Does deliberately ignoring the victims truly help suppress any emerging sense of remorse? In many documented cases of fraud psychology, this pattern correlates with traits commonly associated with antisocial tendencies, in which the suffering of others registers far less intensely than it does for most people. Another family, Lane and Kaylee, hired the Judges in 2021 to handle a major remodel. They paid nearly $200,000 over the course of the project. The finished work included cracked tiles, floors that continued to sink over time, and framing that failed to meet basic code requirements. The couple had to invest significant additional funds just to correct the substandard construction and make their home safe and functional again. Stories like theirs underscore the profound element of betrayal that runs through the entire scheme. From my perspective as a counselor who works with trust violations in both personal and professional relationships, betrayal on this scale often mirrors the perpetrator's own unresolved issues around trust and security. It's possible that a deep-seated need to project an image of success and competence fueled the creation of the entire fraudulent operation. Why would someone specifically choose the field of a home building and renovation, an industry so intimately connected to family stability, safety, and long-term security? The selection may reflect a desire to exert control over something as fundamental as another person's living environment, which can provide an unusually strong sense of personal power and dominance. Jeremy's story adds yet another dimension to the psychological picture. His renovation project was abandoned halfway through, forcing him to live in an RV on his own property for 18 months while he personally completed the work at an additional cost of $250,000. The financial strain ultimately pushed him into bankruptcy. The emotional and psychological toll on victims in cases like this, enormous and long-lasting. And for the people carrying out the fraud, the ability to continue soliciting new clients, even as visible distress mounted among early ones, suggests a progressive desensitization to the consequences of their actions. Over months or years of repeated deception, the conscience can become increasingly numb, a process frequently observed in individuals who display certain personality disorder traits. How extensive does the numbing process become before external intervention finally interrupts it? In this particular case, the pattern persisted for more than 2 full years before law enforcement stepped in decisively. The Judges actively promoted their services on platforms such as TikTok and Instagram, where they shared carefully curated images of beautiful completed homes and promised luxury results at budgeted friendly prices. Sounds too good to be true. Some clients later remarked that the couple reminded them of the popular television personalities like Chip and Joanna Gaines. That online persona dramatically expanded their client base and their egos. From a mental health standpoint, heavy reliance on social media can intensify existing narcissistic tendencies in providing constant external validation through likes and comments and follower accounts. And when a person constructs an entire public identity around fabricated success, Maintaining that illusion, one requires increasingly more elaborate lies. What happens psychologically when the carefully built online image begins to collide with the harsh realities of unfinished projects and angry clients? The typical response is escalation, more deception layered on top of previous deception in an effort to preserve the false narrative at all cost. Prosecutors determined that the scheme ultimately impacted at least 24 separate properties spread across several North Texas counties, although the victim advocates believe the true number of affected families exceeds 40. The documented financial losses approached $4.8 million. Many families lost entire savings, and some were left living in homes that were not safe or habitable. Christopher served as a primary figure on the architectural and design side of the business, producing plans and overseeing initial instruction phases, while his wife managed a large portion of the direct client communications and relationship maintenance. That clear division of labor is noteworthy when analyzing couple-involved financial crimes. In partnerships where both individuals participate in fraud, one partner frequently enables and reinforces the behavior of the other, creating a shared sense of invisibility that helps sustain the scheme far longer than either person might manage alone. Codependent dynamics sometimes emerge, in which each person depends on the other to keep the mutual delusion intact. Even as complaints grew louder and more frequent, the judges continued signing new contracts and accepting large upfront payments. That refusal to pause or redirect despite mounting red flags speaks to an extreme form of overconfidence. The entire operation appeared to depend on a constant influx of new victims whose money could be used to placate earlier clients or to fund ongoing personal expenses. Psychologically, this closely resembles the gambler's fallacy, the persistent belief that the next bet will finally turn everything around, even though objective evidence points in the opposite direction. Why would anyone continue to ignore such clear and accumulating proof of inevitable failure? The behavior may connect to a profound fear of admitting defeat, possibly rooted in earlier experiences of inadequacy or shame, although we lack public details about their personal histories to confirm that link. The formal investigation started with local police departments in Texas before the FBI became involved due to the interstate wire transfers and the scale of the losses. Bank records provided the clearest evidence, showing precisely how client funds were diverted for non-project purposes. When the authorities eventually confronted the couple with that documentation, their public responses remained limited, but the decision to plead guilty indicates at least a pragmatic acceptance of the overwhelming facts presented against them. From a therapeutic perspective, entering a guilty plea can represent a significant psychological turning point for some individuals. It sometimes signals the beginning of genuine remorse, while in other instances, it functions primarily as a strategic choice aimed at reducing potential prison time. What internal shifts take place when a long-running scheme of this magnitude finally collapses under its own weight? The transition often involves moving from a sustained high of perceived control and reward to the stark reality of facing serious legal and personal consequences. One detail that surprised even seasoned observers was the continued posting of polished social media content showing completed-looking homes long after multiple projects had stalled and victims were publicly voicing their distress. That stark contrast between online presentation and real-world outcomes highlights unresolved cognitive dissonance. People engaged in extensive deception sometimes begin to believe elements of their own fabricated story, which can border on delusional thinking. Maintaining a public front served the practical purpose of attracting additional clients, but it also likely helped protect a fragile self-image that could not withstand full exposure. The aha realization in this case comes when they learn about the personal luxury spending that occurred simultaneously with the widespread suffering of dozens of families. The $10,000 spent on plastic surgery, the tens of thousands on retail purchases and mortgage payments, all drawn directly from client trust funds, create an unmistakable picture of emotional detachment. And that detachment stands out as one of the strongest mental health red flags visible throughout the documented behavior. Low empathy, when paired with repeated manipulation and a willingness to exploit trust for personal gain, frequently appears in individuals who display antisocial or narcissistic patterns. Although we have no confirmed information about the childhood trauma, abandonment issues, or early behavioral problems in either Christopher or in either couple, their actions suggest possible learned patterns of prioritizing self-interest above relational harm. Fraud schemes of this duration and scope rarely begin spontaneously. They usually build gradually as small deceptions succeed and tolerance for risk increases. The choice to impersonate a licensed architect, despite lacking any qualifications, carries its own psychological weight. Presenting detailed blueprints and technical designs gave Christopher an aura of prestige and expertise he did not legitimately possess. That form of imposter behavior, reversed in a sense, can serve to fill an internal void left by feelings of inadequacy. Ironically, the very act of faking such specialized credentials almost guarantees eventual exposure, because legitimate professionals and building officials can quickly identify discrepancies. The plan appeared to rely on an oppressive level of optimism regarding how thoroughly forensic accounting and regulatory oversight would fail to notice the misuse of funds. Bank and wire transfers create records that trained investigators follow with relative ease. Overconfidence remains one of the more reliable predictors of eventual forensic difficulties in white-collar crime. Believing that basic safeguards can be outmaneuvered indefinitely reflects a classic mismatch between perceived cleverness and actual detectability. As sentencing approaches in April 2026, several questions remain open. Restitution will almost certainly be ordered, although full repayment to more than 40 victims seems unlikely, given the scale of loss in personal spending that depleted available assets. For the judges, incarceration will bring its own set of mental health challenges, including potential depression, anxiety, and the stress of losing autonomy. Beyond the obvious financial devastation, many report ongoing stress, damaged relationships, eroded self-trust, and symptoms resembling post-traumatic stress responses after being betrayed so thoroughly. As a counselor, I've worked with individuals who spent years questioning their own judgment long after the money was gone. Why do otherwise cautious and intelligent people sometimes fall for schemes like this one? Charismatic presentation exploits very human desires: home ownership, family stability, and the promise of a better future. And skilled manipulators weaponize those desires effectively. They're very good at what they do. The judges demonstrated a high degree of emotional intelligence in the service of harm rather than healing, which represents one of the more troubling red flags in cases of prolonged fraud. That ability to read people, build rapport, and then exploit that connection without apparent distress points toward a significant empathy deficit. The scale of the operation affecting dozens of families over multiple years indicates no single external factor likely started the behavior. Instead, it reflects a gradually increased tolerance for wrongdoing, in which each successful deception lowers the internal threshold for the next one. Fraud psychology literature describes this escalation pattern frequently. The core motive almost certainly includes greed, but greed alone rarely sustains such elaborate long-running activity. Deeper psychological drivers, such as the need for validation, the thrill of outsmarting others, the sense of control over vulnerable people's lives, and the avoidance of honest effort, appear to have played a substantial role. In a marriage where both partners actively participated, shared reinforcement likely helped maintain momentum. Whether that dynamic stemmed from a genuine mutual belief in the scheme or from a codependent enabling remains unclear without direct clinical insight. This is a very interesting case here about fraud. Here we have a husband and wife. They were young, they were energetic, they were charismatic, they had a lot going for them. And unfortunately, they used that whole persona, the facade, the manipulation of people's dreams, their charisma and their energetic and their willingness to be able to lie very, very convincingly and prey on people's desire, their futures, the American dream to build either a new home or remodel their current one. All their dreams, or a lot of their dreams, were built into this, and it was all destroyed. It gives us a valuable lesson that we need to do our homework and vet people and make sure people that we hire to do very big projects like this that have a lot of financial gain, we need to make sure we're talking to the right people with the right credentials. Wow. So what did you think about this case? Were there any elements that stood out to you? Thank you for joining me today. Until next time, stay curious, stay safe.